Okay, so here's the content of my talk in 5 parts. I'm going to first be very interested in crystal clear requirements, and secondly, ideas of decomposing large complex systems into simpler systems where you can deliver value early, get a value stream going. Number 3, be very interested in the concept of, can we estimate how good any strategy or architecture or design decision is for multiple quality and value purposes simultaneously? Can we make an estimate of that? Okay. Number 4, take a look at the ideas of risk and uncertainty, which we're always confronted with. And finally, we're going to take a look at the idea of very dynamic decision-making about architecture in the middle of a series of cycles of delivery. So, first one, now I've organized the talk into 2 parts, if you like, theory, called the principles. And these principles, I believe, are eternal ideas, nothing new about them, treasured historically, powerful my whole lifetime, and I hope they'll be useful for you. In the books we've handed out, you'll find over 100 stated principles in each book, if you want some more advanced principles and discussion of them. But I've chosen to do a few and had a little bit of fun with the alliteration there, just for fun. And then on the right-hand side, we have just a simple, practical example of how our methods, which we call the planning language or planguage, our methods are used in practice. So first up then is an example. I asked a director at a large bank to show me the top-level, most critical requirements for a large system, say about $60 million project, and I got this. Now, if you start scanning it and reading it, you'll discover some things like there's an awful lot of ambiguity and lack of clarity, very few numbers and concrete clarity, and in the objectives or requirements, there's an awful lot of architecture which doesn't belong there at all. It's the confusion of ends and means that Einstein referred to going on there. But this is the way they did things, and a lot of people do things at that level, especially at the executive level of starting projects and things like that. We got the executives to do a little what we call specification quality control. I'll get back to that later in the talk. It's a practice we have some places here at Intel. Simply count the number of ambiguous and unclear words there. Maybe you'll find a few ambiguous, unclear words just by looking. Typical director found about 15 ambiguous, unclear words in just a few minutes. And they then said, well, okay, you've convinced us that we have sort of a garbage-in situation here, but what can we do about it? That's the way things are. That's our culture. And I had 20 minutes left of a 1-hour meeting with the director, and I said, well, I can't do everything there, but pick out something at your leisure that you'd like to see what we could do better with, and I'll do the best I can in 20 minutes. So they picked out improved development environment. Now, improved, how much is that? By when, by the way? And what is the scale of measure for improvement of a development environment? Right? And you don't know, and I don't know, and nobody knows. They probably didn't even know themselves. Now, with 20 minutes, a little bit of interviewing, I took that phrase and we narrowed in on part of the development environment, architectures, doing architectural drafts, and got a scale of measure, calendar time for developers to successfully carry out defined tasks. And then the developer type was an architect, and the task was a draft architecture. And I said, how long time does that take today? And they said, 15 days. And I said, wouldn't it be great if we could improve that by an order of magnitude? And they said, sure would. So I put down the goal, 1.5 days, as you see. Now we have a really clear statement, and we can, of course, do this for different classes of developers and different classes of development work, get a whole set of them. There wasn't time to do it here. But we've already demonstrated how the planning language allows you to make an excruciatingly clear, very difficult to misunderstand requirement statement, totally different from improved development environment. Now we have the basis for engineering, the basis for project management, the basis for clarity of communication on a team, so the team knows what they're working towards, and they don't all misinterpret it and work in different directions without even realizing it. Okay? So this is a practical example of the use of the planning language. Now, Eric has been taught over 17,000 Intel employees 3-day courses on how to do this. So there are probably quite a few. How many people in the room have been on a course by Eric Simmons or some of his colleagues? About a third of you, okay? And the rest of you, you know where to sign up. Okay. By the way, something wasn't mentioned, but the IEEE has just decided to make these courses that Eric is running using my methods standard requirements courses for IEEE. Quite an honor, but they're the best thing in town. Okay, and you've been doing it for years, some of you. Okay. So basically what's happening here is we have some functionality in the system, and that arrow represents one of many dimensions of goodness, a value, a quality, a performance characteristic. And what we've done is defined a scale of measure which defines the concept of a good development environment, and put a little marker in the ground, a benchmark, saying in the past this took 15 days, and then put another little marker in the ground saying we really would like to improve this to do the work 10 times faster. So this becomes an excruciatingly clear requirement. All projects, all new products are about improving multiple characteristics of a system to be more competitive, right? Those characteristics need to be quantified at the outset. I believe they need to be quantified on the first day of the project because they're so fundamental to absolutely everything else. At least a draft of the quantified things on the first day. You can, of course, change them, modify them, rebalance them as you get more insights and go along. So the key principle here is that perfect or near perfect product plans presume quantification. And it's something you can't take for granted. A lot of people say, well, we quantify all the dollars here and the seconds here, but this soft stuff, this user friendliness and security, well, you know, we just say we're going to have extremely high security and fantastic user friendliness. And these are soft, so you can't quantify them. Of course you can. That's wrong. But some people don't know that, and they don't know how. Okay, okay, back to our starting slide. We take a look at the practice here is that we teach that in order to describe a requirement or quality, we describe a series of parameters. The ambition level, for example, is the management bullshit level. We might even quote some manager bullshitting and not tell him we think it's bullshit. We just say, thank you for your guidance, but we're techies, so we're going to quantify it because we're engineers. Then we dip down and say, what's the scale of measure? That's the key question. It's an amazingly powerful idea that too few people ask themselves. What can we define this idea of an improvement in our product or services with a scale of measure? And when you've got a scale of measure, you can then start putting numbers on it. Start putting numbers on it, you can use logic of design, you can use reasoning, you can track, measure, motivate, synchronize, amazing quantity of properties that come up once you've got that thing that the key things, the critical things, have to be quantified. If you don't know how to find a scale of measure, I'll give you my 5-second teaching course on how to find a scale of measure for anything you can imagine. Now, think of some quality that's important for you, just in your mind. Yeah? And now, how many of you say, I know how to measure that quality and I do it? Okay, sort of reluctant hands going up. Now, grab your iPhone or whatever and get to your browser or Google and put the name of that quality there and the word metrics after it, and watch what happens. You'll get between 800,000 and 800 million hits, and on the first page, the first 1, 2, or 3, will be perfectly good advice of how to quantify it, but by people who've done it before. Okay? In other words, the knowledge of how to quantify practically, or at least you'll find an awfully good close template that you can modify from. The knowledge of how to quantify any interesting value you have, any interesting quality is already out there on the internet. So you shouldn't be in denial like, well, it can't be quantified. It's soft. That's embarrassing when you look it up and find that 500 people have already done it and they've published it and you just didn't know about it, right? Check it out on your iPhone before you look stupid saying it can't be done. And then get on with it and do it. And accelerate your progress here. I was just reading a paper by Terzakis of Intel from, we're going to look at him a little bit later, and he's using these methods of quantification for the requirements, and he's using some quality control methods, I'll show you, that we've also taught. And he makes the point that in going from a generation 1 to 2 of some products at Intel, they shaved off the time, which was like 540 days, down to 400 days. They shaved off 140 days by using these methods specifically. Okay? We're talking about accelerating results at this conference, remember? Okay? These methods are known to accelerate results at Intel. Okay? You'll get a copy of the paper I just mentioned when you follow a link on the last slide here. Okay? So, now, of course, in any real system, there isn't just one thing you're going to improve. There probably is a set. I often just call that set the top 10, but they could be 5 or whatever it is. But it's the critical few, most critical things that you have to focus your team on. And it keeps, these can all be put on one page, quantified, simplified. And it's wonderful. You get very focused. That one page is the agenda for the whole team, for the entire project. Right? And anybody looking at project management can just ask one simple question. To what degree are we moving forward towards our goals? Oh, no forward motion for 3 months? What's going on here? There should be a value stream starting in the second week of any project and delivering at least incremental value all the way. I'll talk about more about that later. Okay, so one takeaway point here. Variables, in other words, improvements and important competitive edges, need to be quantified using a definition of the scale, and then you need to know how good or bad your own product is and your competitors' products. That's the pass level. We need to know sort of a minimum acceptable level to even think about releasing the product without shame. Let's call that the tolerable level, the worst acceptable case. And finally, we need to define competitive success, where we're definitely going to beat the competition. That's the goal level. When is a project done? When you've reached your goal levels. Okay? Definition of done is often discussed in agile circles. Okay? So second subject is decomposition. Now this is highly related to what we call EVO, which is part of language, but EVO is evolutionary value delivery. Okay? And it is an agile method, but it's an agile method that uses numbers and feedback. And if you'll think about it, numbers and feedback about the critical values, not just about we did so and so many user stories and we have so and so many bugs and we've used so and so many hours. Those aren't that interesting. It's the value you deliver that makes you competitive, not how many bugs you don't have or do have or how much time you used. Right? So we have to shift our focus to being value-oriented. Now the decomposition idea here is really saying you're going to get some big architectural ideas, which maybe will take 6 months or a year to implement. But you need to get rolling early, like next week and every week. So you need to be able to decompose into small 2% steps to trial and get feedback about your architectural ideas. And if they're bad ideas, you need to be able to change those ideas very early in the process. Otherwise, you lose time if you discover too late you've got the wrong architecture. You're not exactly accelerating your results. There's another tactic for accelerating results is get the awful truth about that architecture everybody believed in that really isn't going to work at the earliest possible stage. But it requires decomposition. Now, some principles of decomposition, like I like to get down to 2% increments, and I found we can do it. And we have some power planning practices, different, we'll give you a peek at them. Some practical tools for doing it. So those are the principles, but they basically say decompose so you can deliver value early and in small increments. The next question everybody says, yeah, good idea, but I can't decompose this. It's a big thing that just doesn't admit to decomposition. And we say, well, you're wrong, but maybe you need to learn some methods for decomposition. Here's a practical example. This is Philips of Holland. This is a business area of basically building logic boards with chips and all that stuff. And they had a project that was stuck. The project was estimate the time for a production run before the production run. So you know whether you're dealing with 37 hours or 37 days or something like that. This project was totally stuck. The estimates were extremely bad, worthless, and they didn't know where to go. And I sat with Frank, who was the project manager, and his director, and I said, well, what we need to do is divide the problem that you're stuck on into small incremental weekly deliveries and learn and get feedback and make some progress. The director immediately said, not going to happen, impossible. I would know if there's any way to do it. But the joke was, Frank didn't listen to his director's bad advice and did listen to our good advice on methods for decomposition, so he did it. And you're looking at the weekly increments where they're running, well, those numbers there represent the number of test cases, test runs, right? And you're looking at the gradual increase in the delivery of the value of accuracy of estimation of how long the production run would take, right? And you see they're winning, they're doing it. When this diagram was later put in front of his colleagues and the director, there was spontaneous applause. They'd broken through, and everybody knew how badly stuck they'd been. But they'd broken through because they'd learned to decompose and deliver value week by week and get to a point where basically they had a great set of accuracy in the week 17 there. So, okay. Now here's another example. This is a small Norwegian company, just a few hundred people, but and it does software and services for opinion surveys, especially for marketing people. I know that Boeing and Microsoft, for example, use this service. We're trying to find out if Intel uses it, but we haven't quite found out before my talk, but I'm guessing maybe they do. But anyway, at the point we met these people, they were an 8-year-old startup. They had conquered half the world market, which isn't bad for a little Norwegian company and how all these blue chip companies. But they were kind of stuck. For example, Boeing and Microsoft said to them, it takes 1 week to learn to use your tool. And for people using it every day, like our marketing people, that's okay. But we would like to use your tool for surveying all projects at Boeing and Microsoft, but we can't train the project manager for 1 week on your course. Just to do that, that'd be ludicrous. So if you can deliver a product that requires no learning time, no 1 week course, we'll buy thousands more licenses and you'll get rich. So they said, okay, so this is called usability. You'll notice here in the goals, a lot of the goals are called usability. Okay? You notice we're even quantifying things that you might not think are so easy to quantify, like the intuitiveness of the system. That means the degree to which you don't need any training and advice and manuals and things like that. And they actually had 25 qualitative properties. This is 1/4 of them taken by a team of 4 people to work on, with the agenda to try to deliver the goal levels. I wonder if this is, deliver the goal levels by the end of a quarter of a year. So every quarter of a year released to the world, the product. But every week, 12 weeks, they have an agenda of attacking, in a sense they've decomposed. They said, we have 1/4 of all the goals, our team. There are this many, 5 or 6 different goals. This, by the way, at the end of week 9 of 12 is the progress to date. This means we've achieved half of that, all of that, 2/3 of that, none of that, none of that, and 112% of that. Okay? In fact, in 75% of the time, 9 out of 12 weeks, they had achieved an average of about 91.8% of the value delivered. This is totally different from a burn down chart. This is a value burn up chart or something like that. Okay, we're tracking the value for money and time, and it's quite clear that they have 8% of the value to deliver, but they've got 25% of their time to do it. So what happens? They always deliver all of their values by redeploying their forces dynamically to the weak points. They don't waste their time on things that are already achieved. At the beginning of week 9, they took a look down here and said it was at 0. And they said, let's attack that one. We have to get delivering a market report in 65 minutes, which everybody's living with today, get that down to 25 minutes if we can. They looked at a half-hour stand-up meeting. They looked at about 12 design options. One was market information recoding. Every design option, they asked a very simple question. How many minutes are you going to save? We have to save 40 minutes here. This one, they estimated they'd save 20 minutes, which is 50% of the way to the goal. And that was the best design they had. And they reckoned they could do it in their time-boxed cycle of delivery, 4 days. So they did it. And at the end of the week, they delivered the integrated software to Microsoft Usability Labs, who kindly said, we will measure all your usability stuff for free overnight. They did. And Microsoft said, you know what? You saved 38 minutes. That's 95% of the goal. And then they said, Let's use the weekend to fine-tune this to cross the border at 100, so we have the next 3 weeks to deal with bigger problems like 0, 0, and only 50 and 66%, which they probably cracked at the end of the day. You're looking at a thing I call dynamic design to cost, but you're looking at all kinds of decompositions. One kind of decomposition is we have 25 different goals, of which a team takes care of about a fourth of them, okay? And then you have a very clear idea of what it means to reach each of the goals. It's moving from here to here. The designers can then, let's see, I think I have a little bit of that there. The designers can then speculate, well, what would get us to the goal and make an estimate, a tricky business, but they weren't too badly off when they said 20 minutes, even though the real answer was 38 minutes. Some of that could be that they did smart things after they decided to do it, that they hadn't foreseen at that point. Okay? But anyway, so this is one, and they're also saying we're going to do something every week no matter what. This is 2003. Even today, on their website, confirmit.com, you can see they're bragging in their blogs about Gilb's Evo methods, helping us be a better business and be competitive with quality. Okay, in the first year or so, they wiped out their competitors and took them over because they had such overwhelmingly high quality, which I think that's the next slide. Of the 25 things they targeted in the first quarter of a year, these are 5 of the ones that most sensationally move forward like you wouldn't believe. Things that have been standing still for 8 years in their old product suddenly leaped ahead, blew the minds of their current clients who stayed with them and prospective clients who joined them instead of the competitor. Competitors were hit by this, didn't know what was hitting them, and went out of business, and they took them over. So this is Evo in practice. Now I'm pushing, there we go, okay. So the key principle here is we need to decompose our larger architecture and strategy ideas into much smaller, I call them 2%, 1/50th is a good size. That's a good size because if you do it and it's wrong, you can afford to lose. If you did 99% and you lose, you've lost too much. It's like a gambling strategy. How much do you gamble on 27 in Las Vegas at the roulette wheel? And certainly not your whole wad, unless you're stupid. Okay, when I go to Las Vegas, I take only $10, I put it on red, and no matter what happens, I walk away, with or without an extra $10. That's my very conservative gambling strategy. It's worked the last 2 times, but third time, probably not lucky. Okay. Okay, I'm pushing buttons and hoping there's a receiver. Okay. So this is the decisive decomposition for evolutionary value delivery. And there we go. Now, here are some of the practical tools which we will make available to you in detail. But and we'll show you some of them. The first one is I'm going to show you a thing called a value decision table, which has a lot of interesting things you can do, but one of them, it helps you decompose. Number 1 and 2 are really about that. Number 3 is a simple decomposition method called the 1-1-1 method. We'll take a peek at that on a slide. And then 20 principles of decomposition, which are about 40 years of experience of me intuitively guessing how to, a general principle that will work for decomposition, and later discovering it's worth writing down and making it a teachable discipline, teaching the art of decomposition. And we have quite a few other tools there. But let's take a look at the value decision tables. I'm pushing a button. Ah, okay. Helps. This is from the Lviv, Ukraine Business School, and the business students there decided to exercise on a Mars mission, which quite surprised me. They thought that was fun. So this is actually part of that on a value decision table. I'm trying to think, should I? Okay. There we are. That's using a tool called ends and means tool. But now this is a value decision table. On the left-hand side are some of the objectives of the mission, and they're quantified. The wish level with wish 90, wish 95 is actually the level they wish to achieve. Wish means we haven't got the architecture, we're not sure what the architecture will cost, therefore we can wish for this level, we can value it, but we cannot state it as a goal. Goal means committed, and we know we have the architecture, and we know they have the money and resources to do it. This is about setting expectations at different stages of what we can really do. Anyway, they have some goals there. On the top, it says use more, use jet. These are just abbreviations of a tag which refers to some strategy or architecture which is defined in more detail. Everything's defined in more detail. Now, the numbers in the middle are a rating. And in simple terms, if I put a number 0% there, I'm saying that this strategy doesn't contribute anything plus or minus, good or bad, to that goal. If I say 100, it means it gets me all the way to my goal on time. And I believe you should all be asking that of all of your technologies, how far does it get me by my deadline towards my goal? Ask that question. Notice what they're doing. They probably have brought in a strategy to address one of the goals in particular, but they are simultaneously required to estimate the side effects on all other goals and on costs. This is multidimensional side effect thing, a good engineering practice. Right? What's surprising is how many positive side effects there are out there, of the order of magnitude 20, 30, 40% without you even asking for it. But every once in a while there's a whopper of a negative side effect that says, stay away from this, you can't afford to do it. You've got to find a totally different architecture that does not have a big negative side effect like that. Okay? But this is a traditional engineering idea of systematic side effect analysis before you commit money and time to an architecture and screw everything up and say, I wish we'd planned this better. Okay? You accelerate by, this is something we do sometimes. We draft a table like this in 1 day. Okay? So we're not using 6 months to think about this before we leap. We're often using 1 day to get a draft saying, looks reasonable, so let's move on. Okay, and you can refine that table anytime you like with better estimates and stuff like that. But this is literally, time and time again, 1 day draft exercise to make sure that you have a fairly decent set. Now the point here is we've already decomposed, let's say you have a 10 by 10 table. You have 100 intersections. Every intersection is a value intersection. Every intersection is an opportunity to deliver, using some part of that strategy, some degree of that value. Right? So if you just scan the numbers, and the one in the upper right-hand corner was a big number, you say, that's a very high value. Then you ask the question, using that particular architecture, can I find a small component of it that allows me to plug it in and see what happens, and see if it indeed does give that or those values we've estimated or not. Okay? But the point is, not only that, but a computer, and we do this normally, can point out where your value opportunities are in the decomposed table. So I feel like decomposition is just automatic because we are going to analyze everything anyway. We end up inadvertently almost with decomposition. And then we end up with a decomposition where you can see, because of the numbers, the things that are probably going to be high-value things that you ought to say, can I do this next week? And a computer can tell you that. We recommend that you look into this one because it's a big fat number. So that's a method for decomposition, spotting value, and moving from that to, okay, let's try this out next week. It's just a simple, practical idea. Here, the table, of course, can be displayed in this way. What you're looking at is a performance, which is the left-hand column, and the yellowish column is cost, performance and cost ratios. The little I figures are degrees of uncertainty or risk. Notice in the middle there's a hell of a big, nobody really knows where it's going to be, high-risk thing. And the computer has automatically sorted these different strategies into highest value to risk. So it's the highest value to cost first, perhaps with regard to risk, which is one of the options there. So on the left hand, you basically have sorted these. Let's see, I've got a slide. There we go, highest value to cost. And then the one on the left-hand side is sort of screaming at you, this is a winner, why don't you look into what you can do in the short term to get that value and find out whether those technologies actually work as advertised. So what we're doing is we're automating parts of the design process and parts of the project planning process. The key to the automation, of course, is the quantification of the objectives in the first place. But what you're looking at is stage 2. The quantification, also known as the estimation, of how good are our technical designs for our quantified goals. And if you don't have quantified goals, you can't do that. Okay? There's a third stage, which is how good were they in that first week, we measure and plug in the learning. This is a plan, do, study, act cycle of Deming, for example, happening. We can do, capture the detail, study, and then act, like change the design, change the cost framework, time framework, whatever is necessary to meet your overall objectives within a reasonable time frame. The 1-1-1-1-1 method is a simplification. Your project might look like this: 75 stakeholders. You need to get 10 different goals to 100% improvement in the long term. You have 43 different qualities or values you're managing. You have a 2-year deadline, hundreds of functions, and 2,500 technical ideas. So this is like overwhelming complexity. In fact, it isn't as complex as some of the real systems some of you already have, I'm quite sure. It's just an example. The 1-1-1 method says, don't get overwhelmed by that. Why don't you use the 1-1-1 method? It basically says, look, moving 1% ahead in a week is a hell of a lot better. Moving one means delivering value. Delivering just 1% of the 100% value in a week is a lot better than delivering 0% of the value in the week. 0% means you don't know if anything works or will ever work. You can't get any reaction from a stakeholder like, I like it, or I said I liked it, but I really don't, or anything like that. You've got to deliver a something rather than nothing. So these ones are really about 1 rather than 0. Being the idea. It's a simplification idea, a way of saying, don't worry about the whole thing. You will faster and better accelerate your results towards the whole if you start doing something in practice and getting feedback and learning and acting on that learning. Okay? You might have lots of stakeholders, but why not just pick one and focus? The guy in the picture, that's General Schwarzkopf of the 1st Gulf War. He was actually the stakeholder we picked when we did this at U.S. Department of Defense on a project. And he was the one complaining about the systems at the end of the war because they weren't fast enough for him. So lots of other people in Department of Defense, but they just said, let's please the commanding general first. He's the one complaining. That's focusing on a stakeholder. One value was how fast the general got the information of how many bridge builders he had, which was the function, how many of it, people of a certain type do I have, kind of question. And within 1 week, and et cetera. The solution, turns out, to him getting a fast answer was to avoid him being put in last in a queue of 15,000 people and move him ahead. If general, then give him highest priority answer. That was the technical solution. I asked people, can you do that technical solution next week? I know it looks small, but there could be 6 weeks of testing before you're allowed to release it or something like that. And they said, we can do that. And I said, how do you know you can do it? And they smiled. This is during the first planning week. And they said, because we've already done it. They say some of these small increments are so simple, they'll take an hour or something like that. People are so tempted when they learn what to try them right now. Get out of the room and do it and see what happens. Don't wait for next week. Just do it. And then they actually cracked one of 10 problems the general had, the speed of getting an answer, by just doing it in an hour once they discovered this insanely simple idea of he was getting a late answer because he was at the end of a queue of 15,000 soldiers. For 8 years he'd been at the end of the queue. Okay, rank normally has its privileges, but some software people don't understand that, so they put the general at the end of the queue. Yeah. In the book, which you have an electronic copy of, Competitive Engineering, there is a set of principles. These are the ones I went back in about 40 years of me decomposing where other people said it couldn't be done. And I said, was there a trick or a general principle I was using that I maybe have reused? Can I write it down? And so this is just my experience being written down, but it becomes the basis, if you like, of a theory or a teaching discipline for how do you decompose. The first one is ridiculously simple. It's people as smart as you, as experienced as you, take a look at some kind of architecture idea, and I'm saying we should do it every week, and you're saying, no way, and I'm the expert on that, and you're not, Tom. Okay? What we've discovered is if we say, well, you think you're wrong, but of course it'd be nice of us to prove that you're wrong to your own satisfaction rather than just say you're an idiot. So what we've found is if you persist, remember these intrapreneurs, the guys who persist? If you persist and don't give up in 5 minutes, arrogantly saying, if I can't solve the problem of decomposition, nobody in the universe can. Isn't that arrogant? That's what people do. I don't know the solution, therefore there is none. They give up and they move on. I said, wait a minute, let's just, let's put a challenge out there. A bottle of Oregon beer to the guy who solves it first or comes up with a good answer. Have a little competition. It's amazing if you just give yourself, let's say an hour, how easily several decomposition solutions tend to flow from people who haven't got their mind closed and are in a competitive mode and want to find solutions. What we found is the solutions are always there, no exceptions. But it's difficult to believe until you've seen this happen a few times. Like, you're sure it couldn't happen, and then 5 minutes later, Gilb pulls a little solution out of the hat, and you say, oh my God, you're right, it can happen. Okay? So it's often that simple. But that's one of the principles, just persistence, don't give up. And that's why the winning entrepreneurs are winning entrepreneurs, like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk. They don't give up easily. So here's just one of them. You can maybe even understand what you can break down and how far you can break down if you just dive in and get some practical experience. This is like steveblank.com, my favorite entrepreneur advisor. He's always saying, get out there on the street, get in the smoke diver suits and get into the fire, literally, okay? steveblank.com, weekly free newsletter. You want to understand analysis like this, that's the man. He's the one who taught Eric Ries and other people lean startup, by the way. A remarkably interesting guy. Okay, so one takeaway point about decomposition. Value decision tables, which I sometimes call impact estimation tables, but same thing, point out the best 1% opportunities for values, costs, and with regard to risk. We'll talk about risk in a little bit more detail. Third section here, elegant effect estimation. Okay, so this basically says that any design idea, which has different names like architecture, technical solution, managers call them strategies, okay, more generally call them the means to the end, they can always be evaluated or analyzed with regard to how powerful they are, their effect, in delivering the value you want. You can put a number on how good you think it will be based on your knowledge or maybe not so much knowledge. But we make a very careful distinction between solid, rock-solid knowledge and background for making an estimate and pretty flimsy, wild-ass guesses. Okay? So we don't fool ourselves with numbers there. But the principles just say that we can make an estimate. It's very useful to make estimates. It doesn't have to be super accurate, but it would be nice if it were order of magnitude, which is a good engineering principle. So we got a guide as to what we should be mucking about with first and early, the seemingly high values. If it isn't really high value, we will get feedback early enough to tell us it isn't, get out of there, and we will learn that we're bad at estimating. So we learn estimating by doing estimating. You can get, my friends at Confirmit have been doing estimating for like 13 years every week now. Dozens of people. They get quite good at it by constantly making an estimate, and within 4 days they see whether their estimate is right or wrong. They get good at estimating their technology. So here's the same setup we had before. I've added the tolerable or worst acceptable level, and then saying how we're going to get there. And design A will do about 80% of the job. That's nice, and design B won't do more than about half the job, but might be nice because it turns out design A, when implemented, may only get us halfway, and design B might be a good backup option to get us the rest of the way. Might be able to add it. So we're just looking at options, but we're not going to do both simultaneously. That would violate a holy principle of experiment and cause and effect. You do one at a time and see what the hell happens. So we're going to bet on one, design A, see what really happens, whether it's 5 seconds or 55 seconds. Could be anything in that range. And then we'll make a decision. Do we need design B, or do we need something different from design B, or do we need to tune or refine design A to get to our goal? Those kinds of decisions. These are dynamic decisions. So key principle, we can estimate with useful accuracy any technology, including totally new technologies with which there is very little experience. Okay? By the way, if you have absolutely no knowledge of what you're doing and you can't estimate anything, maybe you shouldn't be trying to plug it into an Intel product. Maybe that will not give you massive acceleration towards good results. So it's a way of finding out of the known unknowns and all that stuff. Okay? Okay. Now, the practices, well, we use the value decision table that I've already shown you, We use the needs and means tool. It's fairly new, which is totally built on the ideas in competitive engineering. We hope to play with that a little bit, maybe this afternoon, and certainly on a sort of a private in-house session we're doing on Friday with Eric and his team. The planning language suggests a number of tools for estimation. For example, you estimate a number, but what's the plus-minus uncertainty? It isn't ±0, probably, right? That's a sign of an optimist. The exact number is known, okay? And then, but then when you make your estimate, you're asked to give the evidence, the facts beneath your estimate. And if the answer is, I have no evidence, well, that's pretty shaky and uncredible. By the way, what is the source of your evidence? Is it a peer-reviewed journal scientific experiment or some guy you met in a dark bar you can't remember the name of? Those are good sources and bad sources, and good evidence and bad evidence. And this is scientific practice, nothing less. We're trying to bring a little science make it into good engineering. Anyway, so those are the different practices. Here's a little structural review of the value decision table. Starts out saying we have, for example, one or more objectives, values we want to get to become competitive. We have a number of proposed solutions, 1, 2, and 3, and we need to say, well, for solution 2, what is the impact of solution 2 on our objective? And same thing for 1 and 2 in their time. What is the expected impact, the expected value I'm going to get from it? And then and by the way, there may be 10 objectives, and each one of those 3 will be rated on 10 objectives, right? So this is just a simplification. Then the question is, what's it going to cost us? Just because it reaches our objectives isn't enough. If it takes 25 years to reach our objective, then that isn't very interesting in this environment. We've got to be fast, quick to market. If it's costing 10 times more than anybody will ever pay for it, that's also very uninteresting. You've got to have products that you can sell at a profit. So we need to look at the impact of the architecture design decision on various resources. I was holding a talk at the London Software Architecture Conference about 2 or 3 years ago. 300 people. These are IT enterprise architects. They're flaky people, put it mildly. But so I asked them a question. How many of you, if you were doing security architecture, I tried to narrow into something a little bit more concrete in this architecture, when you recommend, your encryption and passwords and whatever security architecture, how many of you actually cost this architecture? Put a dollar number on it. And 3 people out of 300 raised their hand. So there's clearly a large practice in the world among software architects of not bothering to cost anything. No wonder projects run over time and over budget, because you're just plugging in an unknown and the corporation pays for it, which is pretty stupid. But then I asked them the question I really wanted to ask them. I asked them the easy one about, quantifying cost. Everybody understands that. How many of you, when you plunk a chunk of architecture for security on the table, estimate how much security you get in relation to your quantified security goal? Remember, most of them don't quantify their security goals at all. And 1 person out of 300 architects raised their hand. That's the state of the art. In other words, definitely not engineering, some kind of mystical framework religion, And you can get certified in it. I think certified means insane, right? I don't know. I believe you have to be accountable, responsible for the multiple costs, time, people, money, space, whatever, of your design decisions. And you have to use that information to decide, what are we going to do? And what are we going to do next? What has the highest value for money? You see, value for money is also known as profitability. And companies like this are interested in that too. Okay? I'd like to think that when there's a culling of people, that the survivors will be those who have provably delivered value for money, and they got the numbers to prove it. And the people who need to be let go have never done that. Get you? Yeah. Make sure you're on the we can prove we deliver huge value for money. We're going to be the survivors no matter what happens. Okay? Or at least be an awfully good potential employees in another company. Worst case. Your CV is, here's the numeric value for money I delivered, and I can prove it. Here's my data. Okay? Maybe confidential, but you can doctor it up a little bit. Okay. Once you've got these numbers in there, you can total them out the other end and get things like, do we have a safety factor? Have we got more potential value than we actually need. Safety factor 2 is a very good engineering heuristic. Safety factor 1, bad idea, because anything fails, you're going to fail. Okay, so we systematically look at the idea of safety factors and whether we're overrunning budgets and things like that. And finally, we can compute the value to cost ratio, or more particularly, since you have maybe 10 values, the values for costs. We're enforcing multi-dimensional thinking. That means realistic modeling, realistic thinking. Right? The values for costs ratio is what should determine what you do first, what you prioritize, if you want to make a profit. Okay? If you don't listen to these things, your project will fail, you will be late, and people will be asking, what are we paying these people for? Nothing. Yeah? Okay, so going to the fourth section. It'll be tricky here with timing, but knew it. A little bit about risks, and one of the things is let me just focus on number 2 there. We worked for about 10 years for the base station group at Ericsson. And got to learn, Ericsson's a really good engineering company like Intel, much older, of course, and they have a quality policy there. And among the many other good things that policy says is that risk management is the job of absolutely every engineer at all times. Isn't that interesting? Not a separate group, not a separate discipline. Every thought you think, every detail you look at, you're supposed to say, is there a risk here that I ought to be managing, mitigating, worried about, thinking about, things like that. Okay? But for me, risks are pervasive. That is, in every little detail of language, every little parameter, every little square on the table, there is inherently degrees of risk. And you need to know the difference between high and threatening risk and low and forget it for the moment risk. And you need to start dealing with that risk by saying, if that risk kicks in and things go bad, what is my backup plan? What is my mitigation to prevent it happening? Okay, so this wonderful idea of, risk is everybody's job at all times. And every little detail in the planning language and EVO is about risk management. Here's a simple idea. I alluded to it earlier, talking about the guy in the bar who you couldn't remember the name of. When we're asking for an estimate on this table, as I said, we ask for the evidence. How did you compute 23.3? And the source. Was it a scientific paper or a person or something like that? Or are you just making a guess personally? And based on that, we rate every one of those 100 estimates on a scale. This is something we developed for Medtronic in Minnesota. And we give a score. So if it's really lousy, bad guesses, it gets credibility 0. And it's really fantastic, hard science, and it's going to happen, there's no doubt about that, it gets a 1.0 or 100% rating, if you like, right? So every one of those 100 elements on the table actually has, if you've done this properly, a credibility rating. So imagine 2 technical proposals. Intel's going to bet on one, bet the company on one or the other. They're otherwise equal in everything except one has credibility rating average 0.8. And the other has credibility rating 0.2. Yeah? If management dares to pick the 0.2, you say, you sort of point your symbolic gun at them and say, are you feeling lucky today, punk? I mean, it's insanity. Management engineers should be working out the degree of risk and able to present it in intelligible ways to managers who must make decisions like go with this or go with that to save the company. And we're not good enough at it, but we should be systematic. It should be the culture of the day, required thing. Okay? We have a lot of people at Intel interested in doing requirements with language. We don't have enough people interested in doing the impact estimation table. It's like not quite motivated to go that deep. I was a little bit shocked. I thought good engineers love this stuff right away. What's wrong with Intel? It's my question. But Eric will hold a course on it. I think he holds about 3 a year, but it's not the highest demand course. People aren't motivated to do it. Just out of curiosity, how many of you at this point are thinking, I might be motivated to learn more about the impact estimation value decision table? Wonderful. I won. I can walk off stage. Early break. It's such a wonderful tool. You'd be amazed, but do play with it a little bit, make up your own mind, is my primary advice. Okay. Now, okay. Sorry. Fiddly, panic. End of lecture time. How did all that happen? There we go. Now, here's an example. I alluded to this to begin with. This is from an Intel project published in 2011. Terzakis, who's from Boston, and he's using two things. He's using the training that Eric gives on language, on clear specification of requirements, right? So everything is exceptionally clear. He's also using a method I call specification quality control. Almost guess what that means. And is using a related concept called formal exit levels. Okay? Now, if you knew that each page of your requirements had 100 major defects or unintelligible things in them, would you think it's a good idea to hand it to an architect? Garbage in, garbage out. Guaranteed. That's stupid. But you know what? People do that all the time. Oh, thank you. I've been waiting for that. Pulled it in. No quality control going out, no quality control going in, and they accept garbage in. Okay? Now, in this case, having been trained in language, if you look at the first line there, 0.3, a 31-page real Intel document, they find 312 major defects. Major defects are project threatening, accelerating result delivery threatening things, okay? And in fact, Terzakis talks a lot about exactly how much they do threaten time at Intel, these defects, okay? I talked about saving 140 days on projects, okay? That's sort of my really should shut up, but maybe I've been given license to finish my talk. You put up with it. So basically, Intel has higher standards than that. In fact, they have standards very close to what NASA has for almost the same reason. It's too expensive to screw up at the end. Okay? So they say no exit, meaning this document's going nowhere except back to the people writing requirements. By the way, the exit criteria you see at the bottom is 0.2. In other words, they have 50 times more defects than is allowed. Okay? And this is good, because before they learned language, they were probably at 80 to 180 major defects per page. By learning language, you almost instantly go down to 10, which is a good start, but you don't just magically go to 0.2. You have to sweat it a little bit more. So you can see the process of sweating, no exit, no exit, no exit, no exit, no exit. Finally, they have a 45-page document with only 10 defects, which means 0.2, and they release. Oh my God, why is Intel releasing requirements documents with defects in them? And the answer is, it's cheaper to tackle them later. Any attempt to get perfection would lead the project towards infinity, and that would not be an acceleration of the project. There's a tipping point there. It's calculable. But that's the point at which it pays off to release and suffer the odd defect by other mechanisms, which you have to have anyway, testing and that kind of stuff, other quality control. Notice the number one remark there. The scope delivered at alpha milestone was increased by 300%. Does that sound like accelerating anything? Yeah. Okay. This is a combination of two of our methods: specification quality control with exit, and language as a clear language for writing requirements. And I just this morning got a copy of the 2013 paper, which you will get a copy of too, giving the second generation of use of this technology, saving 140 days on from end-to-end delivery of Intel products. That's massive acceleration. Okay. Now, as I'm supposed to sort of wind down here, but have a little bit of license, like there's no speaker on in 2 minutes, anything awful like that, I'll leaf through the rest of it a little more quickly. Here's a fun little example, which some of you might need shortly, unfortunately. Choosing a job, new job offer. So this is done by a man in London. His name is Adrian. I won't tell you any more about him, but except that he has bought into these methods of quantifying everything, my style, for managing everything. And he built up a business under a big corporation from 3 people to 500 people with extreme profitability in the last 2 years. So that's another heroic case study. But he was getting bored because he'd succeeded so wildly. He said, I need a new challenge. I need to start from 3 people again and build up to 500. So he went on the job market. He found a job offer from a bank which had only 5 people in it. But imagine starting JP Morgan's bank and you're the 5th employee or something like that. So he thought that sounded challenging. But long story short, he said, I'm going to use the impact estimation table against my quantified goals. By the way, there are only 3 here, but there actually has a total of about 13 goals, like life-work balance. You know, your family, having time to see them, things like that, really important stuff. And so he's quantified all his goals. He's then quantified how good the staying in the current job strategy as opposed to take the new offer strategy is. And initially he comes up with, it looks like okay, now at some stage it looked initially like the new job was fantastic, much more pay, much more opportunity, much more thrills, much more life-work balance. But he realized something, that he knew everything about the old job practically, and really knew almost nothing as a fact about the new job. He'd not worked in it. I mean, he was in fact going to almost be personally the COO and design the environment himself, and he had yet to make those decisions. So he said, let's do this with regard to risk. Let's do it with regard to the degree of credibility. So you see that the first 2 things on his old job had credibility 0.5, which means we know a lot of stuff and have measures, and low credibility. The new job, well, hardly anything was known and there was much speculation. So he does that across the board. Now, looking at the bar diagrams that are produced from this, on the left-hand side, you get the performance to resource ratio, and it looks like the new job is about 5 times better than the old job. No-brainer, take it. Move, okay? But then he starts looking at the plus-minus uncertainty, and it still looks like the new job is good there. But then he starts looking at the credibility, and so the third column there, and it turns out the new job is just edging ahead of the old job. In other words, if you're not feeling lucky today, punk, and you've got a family to feed and don't want to rock the boat too much, maybe just keep the old solid job you know, okay? Anyway, some of you might like to use this tool, either because you have to or you'd like to. Okay, now, sorry. Suddenly goes 3 at a time. Sorry, going back. Go back, go back, go back. It's not very good at, there we go. And one more, okay. Years ago, I summarized all this technology with masses of numbers so a director or CEO could understand it. It's called the 12 Tough Questions. You get a full paper on this with our handouts. And the beauty of this is they don't have to be technical experts, but these are very innocent-looking but very powerful questions. Somebody's saying, yeah, my widget will increase the security fantastically. And the CEO has the courage to say, but can you give me a number on that? Sounds good. And they're like, well, I don't have any numbers. Oh, you don't have? How can you say it's so good if you have no numbers? And you're now playing my game, language game, okay? And if you look at these questions, you'll find that this is actually a pretty good description of an impact estimation or value decision table going on there, okay? But we're hiding all the technical complexity for the engineers to do, but these are questions a top-level manager should be asking about high-tech alternatives that they don't necessarily, they're not necessarily experts on. There's a whole paper on that you'll get. Now, for this conference, I realize you're not all CEOs of Intel. You're probably all engineers. How many people are engineers here? How many people are not engineers? And they're all sitting in the back, the guys who are not engineers. That's interesting. What does that mean? Okay. But I wrote down 20 tough questions. In fact, I was originally going to hold my lecture based on the 20, but they said that's too much for 45 minutes. Give it up and simplify, so I did. But so the first 10 are of the same nature, okay? But they're, if you like, they're a checklist for engineers to ask about engineering problems. Okay, and they lead you into these things like quantification of your objectives and estimation of the value of the effects and responsibility, like is it no cure, no pay, contracting with outside suppliers and all that kind of stuff. And the second set of them is for design, but basically same set of questions. How good is the design? Can you quantify it? What is the plus-minus uncertainty? What are your sources? Okay, so the questions lead you into the methods or remind you of I hope you would think these are pretty good questions to ask, and I'd like to have that checklist I think we were planning at some point. April, are you here?
Yep.
Hi.
It'll go out after the conference. It'll go out.
Okay.
We'll send this out after the conference.
Okay. You'll get a copy of these particular things as sort of a checklist to remember. Okay. So one takeaway here, it says, the evolutionary value delivery we'd like to highlight as, in other words, these frequent, say, weekly increments of trying out your technology and seeing how it reacts with reality. Call it Steve Blank method, get out there on the street, is a very powerful risk analysis and risk mitigation tool amongst many we could highlight, but we're just highlighting the one. And so, I can run into the home stretch, something I dearly want to show you all. I'm pushing buttons and nothing's happening situation, but probably 10 things will happen at once. Okay. Last part here, long story short, we're going to look at one method called clean room and learn a few interesting things about it. And we'll forget the theory surrounding it. We won't use too much time on it. But this is a method of using this value, quantified, and cost goals in a very intelligent way. Now, how many people here have ever heard about the clean room method? Are there any hands? Oh, okay, hi. Interesting gang, and you're all sitting together, right? You used to work at IBM, right?
No, I only know the theory.
Only know the theory. Okay. But, okay, so not many. One of my jobs as grandfather of this and that is to be the historian. You know, the elder in the tribe that remembers some really sexy engineering practices that work very well that everybody else has forgotten, like most of you. So here's the history. This method of clean room was hell of a time lag. Okay, yeah. We're going to look at something called dynamic design to cost. And I can just get the slides. Okay. So here's what I call the Leonardo da Vinci of software engineering at IBM Federal Systems Division, Harlem Mills. And he was assigned the impossible task. He said when they discovered whenever IBM got a contract as lowest bidder for space or military purposes, they lost money on it every time. Okay? So IBM either had to figure out how to earn money in spite of being the lowest bidder or get out of the business. And they gave him lots of time. They basically gave him 10 years to develop an answer, which is called the clean room method. So there are books. You can easily Google it, get books and papers. We'll give you some pointers to it here and there. But long story short, if you take a deeper look at clean room, you'll discover something interesting. Here's a statement. It is delivered, a real project called the LAMPS project, a military ship, helicopter, submarine communication system, was delivered in 45 incremental deliveries. That's Agile, as we know it today. This is an early, very successful, very large-scale Agile method, long before the Agile Manifesto. This isn't Scrum. Scrum doesn't do this stuff that they're doing here of measuring availability of the system on each iteration and changing the architecture, so I'm going to tell you about, right? So this is an engineering, if you like, an enhancement to the framework of Scrum in engineering. The bottom line in the report there is that for massive, large projects, for example, the Space Shuttle ground software, to mention one, there were few late or overrun deliveries in that decade and none at all in the past 4 years. Now, none at all in the past 4 years I call perfect project management. On time, under budget, meaning they're in a profit, and to the highest quality levels with the newest technology. Same stuff you're always running with, okay? So we have a proven method for dealing with the highest complex technology of the time and still delivering when the market needs it, if you like, the deadline, at a price that enables Intel to make a profit with the sexiest values you can get. Okay? That's what they're doing. Okay? But the trick is they're not just doing Scrum sprints or iterations. They're injecting something that needs to be injected if you're doing Scrum, and you can inject it. When I push Jeff Sutherland and my friends at Scrum on this, they say, yes, but we've just got a framework. You have to plug it in yourself. So you have to plug in that stuff that Eric is teaching on Planguage into your Scrum cycle. And you have to manage the Intel values and qualities and costs at every cycle. Then you have a more useful Scrum than you probably presently have. It's a little bit too focused on, not on values and not on costs. And that's not a good competitive stance. There's a colleague, Mills refers to a thing called design to cost. Remember I said we're going to talk about dynamic design to cost? There's a colleague on his team called Quinnen. I reported this, in fact I worked with these people, and I reported this in my 1988 book. This is the one that makes me the grandfather of Agile. Because all the guys who wrote the manifesto point back and said, we read that book and became convinced we should go Agile. They got the idea of small iterations, good. They were so immature, this gang of young people like, well, we won't mention them all by name, but that they didn't pick up this incredibly simple idea that you should quantify the qualities and values and costs. You know, they were all about, no, we should do programming in small increments, coding. You have a coding framework initially. Unless you add something to it, like I'm suggesting, appropriate for the likes of Intel, which must control multiple values, high, advanced technology, and costs and time. And so, long story short, Quinnen is the architect who every cycle of these 45 in the one example, he dives in there and says, let's measure how much availability we got. We're charged with 99.98% availability. We're at 99.90, not good enough. So the architecture isn't there for getting to where we need to. What architecture should we change now and measure on cycle 3 that tells us maybe we got to 99.98? See the reasoning process? This is not architecture up front. This is architecture in the middle. Agile, as viewed as just a series of cumulative steps, gives an opportunity for radically transforming the architectural job to a job where you have a hypothesis about the architecture, but you prove or deny the hypothesis step by measurement. And therefore, you accelerate the result of delivering the really good quality on time rather than discovering at the end with a delay that you got the wrong architecture. And that's exactly what Quinnen is reporting. If necessary, redesign or rebalance planned capability objectives. Design is an iterative process. That's a wonderful phrase. It's not an upfront, big bang waterfall. The architect does it to begin with. Real architects do follow real buildings as they're being built for good reason. Okay, and another mention that this whole thing reduces the complexity of the task. If you have 10 major architectural ideas all colliding with one another, nobody knows what's going to happen. If you do them a little bit at a time using cause and effect analysis, if you've got a bad architectural thing colliding with some other ones, you've got time to pull it out and change things before you've lost time towards your deadline for market release. So that's about main things. I wanted to get that idea of dynamic design to cost. And we're almost at the end. Isn't too bad. It's a 1 hour talk, isn't it? And I'm pushing the button, estimation comes in there, and there's a takeaway point. You want high quality, on time, under budget, consider using dynamic design to cost clean room. So that's a summary of the subjects I've tried to get through in my hour. And the last slide says that if you go, I'll leave it up there, if you go to that website, you can get emailed the links to all the papers and stuff like that. You already have 2 of my books. I hope at the very least you're inspired to maybe come to our session this afternoon to get more detail. That's the purpose of a 4-hour session, to go into detail about these things, bring your questions along. And then go on some of the courses that Intel is holding for people. And just out of curiosity, how many people now feel motivated to investigate these Intel courses I've been talking about? Eric, are you looking? All right, sign them up. Okay, and if you want to talk to me or argue with me, tom@gilb.com and our website, gilb.com. Thank you very much.